Hello everybody, Attorney Hans Bremer here, here to talk a little bit about the options you may have when you enter the country undocumented. That is somebody who kind of comes across the border, they don't have passport or proper entry, stopped or not stopped by immigration officials, nonetheless they're in the United States, having entered without proper documentation. There are still options for those individuals. It's not that they need to remain in hiding, it's not that there's nothing they can do, contrary to some popular belief. So one of the principal options they have is asylum. Now, if you come across the border without documentation, stopped or not stopped by immigration, you always have the option to file for an asylum, file an application for an asylum, which will be adjudicated by an asylum officer. Now, obviously, not everybody's going to have a valid asylum claim. And you must be very careful and not to lie in your asylum. Let's be completely honest, because a lie on your asylum or a frivolous asylum will bar you completely from all benefits in the future. So while asylum is an option, you need to speak with an immigration attorney prior to filing that asylum claim if you decide you want to go down that route. But it is an option for anybody who enters the country with or without documentation. So that's option number one, asylum. Option number two, if you're married to a U.S. citizen, your spouse can file for you. The marriage petition was discussed briefly in a prior video, so I'm not going to get too much into the marriage petition. What I'm going to talk about now is a little bit what happens after the marriage petition. For those of you who entered the country undocumented, after your marriage petition is approved, the second step would be a waiver. Now it's called a provisional waiver, and that waiver waives your unlawful presence in the United States. And for that waiver to work, you have to show that your spouse needs you. They'll suffer without you. That takes a little while. You submit the documentation with an attorney. I highly suggest an attorney with this. And then after that waiver is approved, you will be scheduled to interview in your home country. So you'll actually have to leave the United States, but not for long. Your marriage petition is approved, your waiver gets approved. You have to leave the United States because you did not enter through the valid processes, so you would need to return to your home country with the waiver in hand for that unlawful time you've been in the United States to then process your immigration visa, your residency in the embassy of your home country, and you would be there only for a little while. You do medical there, and then you'd come back to the United States with your residency. That whole process is taking 2 to 3 years right now, sometimes longer. So it's a slow process, but it's option number two, marrying a U.S. citizen. The other option is marrying a legal permanent resident, which is the same step as marrying a U.S. citizen, just the timing is a little different because of the way the residency application processes for spouses of residents. But basically, those are your options. Initially, asylum through marriage. Another option is if you have other family members who can file for you. Resident parent, a citizen parent can file a petition for you. You can also process the waiver through your parents and then do the same process going to home country and going that route. Now, if you do not have a valid asylum claim, you have no fear of returning to your home country, never been persecuted, no fear of future persecution, or you are not married to anybody, have no relatives here that can file for you, and no possibility of doing the waiver, then obviously those options won't work for you. There are maybe some other options you will have, some of which are a U visa or a T visa, victims of crime, victims of trafficking. Those are some options that are there as well. Now, for those of you who happen to be married to a military personnel, or parents or children of military, or are parents of military, there is something called parole in place. And that is an option that I highly suggest you pursue if your family is military. The parole in place, in essence, changes your status from undocumented entry to being granted a legal entry in the United States, with which you can then adjust status and become a resident, even if you came across the border undocumented. Now, that's something that the immigration officials will determine if you're eligible and should be granted under their discretion, parole in place. It's a huge benefit to those who get it, but it mainly is reserved for family of active duty military or in some instances, military that have been honorably discharged. So those are options you may pursue. Aside from U visa, T visa, parole in place, there's not a lot of whole other options after that. If there's no other options, your only other option might be to return to your country for the requisite amount of time, which may be 10 or 20 years prior to coming back to the United States. But if you have questions, you think you may qualify for asylum, a family petition of any sort, or a T visa, trafficking, or U visa, a victim of any crime, or if you might happen to have military family, or if you've been a victim of domestic violence, any of those things that you think that you might qualify for, feel free to talk to an immigration attorney and call us anytime. Call any immigration attorney near you and sit down and discuss openly and honestly your situation and see if there's a remedy for you to obtain paperwork, residency status in the United States, even though you may have come across the border without documentation. Have a wonderful life.